All right, now we can talk about LPL.
Yeah, let's do it. Because the funny thing is, I actually think the LPL right now, spoiler, like we are going to have a dedicated episode. Don't worry. Like, I don't know if anyone saw, I think actually Andrew accidentally, the producer accidentally tweeted it, but this in theory would have been the LPL episode, but we just had an issue with the scheduling with the guests. So we changed our mind, but we will do a dedicated one because I also think this is a really great split. And especially because the reason why I really want to have an expert on is like, it's a split I find really hard to make sense of. Like the teams are so different in the LPL and it's still so up and down. Like it's probably the craziest variance league ever. Like you can think these are the top two teams this week, and the end of the week you're like, where am I at now? Like because some of these results, there's so many of the big matchups haven't gone at all to plan. We've talked to some of the ones past. Like there've been so many times where the big name team actually lost to like the number 4 team or something. You know.
Another issue was that until the last 2 weeks, we hadn't actually seen LNG play against good teams, which they've been in number 1 in the standings for most of this split, but they also have some pretty obvious flaws, and they didn't necessarily play the cleanest games. And last week, they were coming off of a loss to EDG, which I think makes sense because EDG is like the best macro team and kind of the most complete team, and therefore is going to be able to find ways to shut down the very specific threats that LNG has, even though I think there is an argument to be made that Scout is the best mid laner in the world right now, and Tarzan might be the best jungle in the world. So they have very, very pronounced strengths on LNG. But now they come into this week, and we get to see them beat top esports and then almost beat JDG and play a very entertaining and very legit series against JDG. And we would have said these are 2 of the top 5 teams in the world in top, and JDG. Top probably fell out of that this week based on their performances. I haven't seen the games they played versus LGD yet, so I won't comment on those. But you know, top did disappoint, and this was the do or die week for LNG to show they're legit, and they won 3 out of their 5 games that they played against the top 2 teams. So they are certainly in the conversation for among the best teams in the world at this point in time. But as to your point, Thorin, about not being able to make head or tails of the LPL, the problem is because it's a single round robin, that the strength of schedule is just enormously important to evaluating LPL teams. And if you're very front loaded or back loaded, like we've seen LNG be, like front loaded with a bunch of garbage teams that they play against, and then back loaded with all of the playoff teams, it's difficult to get a real read. And now we have it, which is great because I really like LNG. They're a very fun team to watch.
Yes. I mean, one of the things I actually think makes LNG quite cool is like if I had to choose someone to go to MSI, I wouldn't pick them because they have flaws. And obviously, I could have like a really well-rounded team. I could have the team like EDG with a good macro, or I could have some all-star lineup like Top or fucking JDG or Weibo. But I tell you what, in a weird, perverse sense, I almost would like to see LNG go to MSI. And here's why, Monty. Because I actually think some of their flaws are glaring. Like I think their ADC is actually fucking whack. I think it's just not a very good player.
Not very good,
I think Top's a little bit questionable, but the key thing is what I would almost like to see perversely, Monty, is if you really have a super elite mid and jungle like they do, 2 Koreans, is that enough to just run through Western teams? Like, I'd love to see if they can take just those 2 players, Scout and Tarzan, and just dust off G2 and FlyQuest and like they'll just feel like there's another level to Asian League of Legends, mate, because they can do this against the best LPL teams like we're talking about. Like, in theory, they should get exposed in the LPL, right? But they haven't really. They haven't really, quite frankly.
I think the issue with LNG is that, so if we talk about their strengths, it's Scout and Tarzan are the carries of this team. And they've played every single like kind of champion matchup that you could possibly imagine. Tarzan is so good at pathing. Their early game is amazing. The synergy with mid and jungle is probably the best in the entire world. They really kill it, honestly. And we've seen them do it in so many different ways at this point in time, that it feels like they're pretty meta proof in those positions. Like we get to see the Maokai ultra 8k damage team fight, and then we get to see the great Lee Sin play from Tarzan, and they really are just in a groove right now. And I think I like Zika, actually. Like the more games I watch of Zika in the top lane, the more I like this guy, because he's a weak side melee top laner. And There's nothing wrong with that. I think if they had a stronger bot lane, he would be really good because he's a really efficient player, honestly. He takes very few risks. He's really, really stable in the top side. Not a fan of his Jace, gotta say, but if he's on a Renekton, if he's on a tank, if he's on Jax, like I'm pretty down with the way that Zika plays the game. And the way he controls his lane is very good. His flanking is extremely good. He actually provides really great pressure in team fights, and his positioning is he's almost always threatening the back line on a melee champion, which is difficult to do because you have to get your spacing perfect so you don't get caught, but they're still scared of you coming in. And his setup is very good in that sense. So I really like Zika as a role player. And even though the bot lane of LNG had a better series than normal against JDG, if you watch those games, the eye test between LP and Ruler is just, it's painful at times.
Ruler is the best ADC in the league, probably, yes. Maybe in the world, let's be real.
Yeah, he is, you can just imagine what this roster would look like with a better AD carry or a more threatening bot lane. And they would be potentially contending for a title. So I think it's amazing that they are doing as well as they are, considering that their flaws are pretty serious.
By the way, shout out to any LPL team that manages to have a top team, but not a really good ADC. It's like, are you even trying, bro? They do grow on trees over there. There are just so many ADCs. It's criminal. Like, the joke is, it's like if we talk about some of the other teams, there's names you guys don't even know, just look fucking fire. This splits look really good. Yeah. So, and by the way, here's a stat for you. I've got a couple of stats for you, because the problem I know that Scout will always face in his career, Monty, is this. To a Westerner, they think he's boring because they think, oh, just guys who play like a zero and that. Right. First of all, Scout has played 28 games this split and won on 11 different champions. 11. And then look at, I'll read his top 5 champions that he's playing right now, Monty. He's playing, no, he hasn't played Silas at all. He played Ryze, Jace, Azir, Yorn, Kassadin. What even is that champion pool? That's like everything. Like, if he's a mage player, fair enough. If he was only playing like the fucking Ryze and the Azir, okay, that's one thing, Monty. He's got Yorn and Jace in there. This guy can play anything he wants, basically. Imagine, by the way, trying to draft against this fucker. If he plays Yorn and Azir, like, what? No, this guy he's the MVP, boys. And quite frankly, it makes it look even more obvious that his team, like we say, has massive flaws compared to the other contenders. And this guy just smurfs every game. Even in the games they lost, like that one you're on about against GDG, he was still great in that, mate. He's just a fucking stud. This guy's so good. He's so underrated.
Yeah, and especially because I think what makes Scout and Tarzan's performance better is that we know that they're not working with the best teammates, right?
Exactly.
And even if you like Zika like I do, he is a role player. Ultimately, he's not 369. You know what I mean? Like, he's not that guy, and that's totally okay. But you have to prop it up with some level of carry threat in the bot lane, and I do think it gives me worry, Thorin, when I watch that series versus JDG, and I think to myself, this is probably the best performance that I've seen from LP this year, and he's still a lot worse than Ruler. Like, he's still a lot worse.
Yes.
So, people might get mad because they like LP or Hung or these guys, but if that's going to be their best, unless that's the new standard that we get out of these guys, I would assume, by the way, that was probably an unusual high for LP, whereas Ruler has shown that he can play to that level pretty consistently. So if I replay that series in a playoff game where LP maybe isn't peaking, then that series is not very close, I would say. And I don't want to rely on a player like LP peaking if I could just get a better AD carry.
Yes. It's also just cool because I did have my concerns when I heard Ruler was leaving Gen G of like, great that he's just going to go back to being on an all right team, isn't he? But he just found his way to another like world's contender, so it all worked out in the end, didn't it? Somehow, who the fuck knows how, but it did. All worked out.
So I love watching LNG just because I enjoy their style, and I think they are overperforming. But frankly, I just like watching Scout and Tarzan and Zika to a lesser degree, and seeing how far they can get with this kind of 1-2 punch in the jungle and mid lane against teams that are super teams that just have better players.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.